Hi there, everybody. I'm Dan Fascia. I'm going to talk about something a little bit different to some of the previous talks because being a developer is not my day job. So I'm going to stay way off code with you guys in the room. I'm going to talk about how I leverage Eleventy in the healthcare setting. So my day job is a radiologist. And I'm also very into health technology, and I tinker with code, just tinker. Um, so I think I'm probably the world's biggest Eleventy fan who hasn't got a sticker, Zach. I mean, look at what I've been through to try and get a sticker. I've reserved a place on my laptop for it. I've even resorted to having my 3-year-old daughter make me stickers with her little clicker thing. I just thought I'd drop that in there while I had the stage. It's a long running joke between us. Let's talk about where I started with all of this. Back in 1998, I made my first ever website when I was at school. It was, of course, a Jamstack website because everything was in those days. Fast forward to 2001, and I started using movable type, which is actually a great CMS that was Jamstack because it made static sites. It rendered every time you saved. It took a long time. It was made in Perl. We just put that to a side. There were a few wilderness years with a few PHP type things. And by 2016, we were back on track using Jekyll, but suffering Ruby, and then Hugo. And it's great, but I just couldn't get along with the Go template language. Fast forward to 2018, and I was so delighted when Eleventy came along, and we had something in the Node.js ecosystem that had all of the kind of features of Jekyll. And fast forward again, and things like Tailwind CSS, Alpine, a couple of emerging technologies I'm interested in, HTMX to add WebSocket features, and Magic for easy auth. So my current go-to kind of minimal starting stack would be my team, Tailwind, Eleventy, Alpine, and plain old Markdown files. But what you came here for is to hear about some of my medical use cases of Eleventy. So here we go. So a bit of a fraudulent start because I'm just going to talk about websites. But isn't it amazing for healthcare? Because fast, performant, safe, low risk of being hacked, ideal for healthcare information sites where the quality of information has to be accurate and it needs to be delivered to people with low bandwidth. So skipping through a few things that I've made, this is very much a brochureware site. It uses Eleventy, Tailwind, and Alpine for some minimal interactions. All of the data is provided in Markdown. And then I use a nice little form tool called Cognito, which allows us to take medical referrals because it supports encryption and PDF generation. The very first thing I ever made with Eleventy is this site, which is my hospital's departmental scan protocols. It's just 1K of CSS, no JavaScript. GitHub is the CMS and it uses Markdown files. So it's as basic as it gets, but it's just perfect for documentation style sites. And Eleventy is really good for that. And speaking of documentation sites, in the UK, we run some really big national ones on Eleventy. Here is a website from the National Health Service, and it's built on an Eleventy stack. Now, the great thing is that the National Health Service has Nunjux-based components, which I can just pull in easily. I don't like the CSS they use. They use BEM CSS, and I sort of stubbornly rewrote all the components in Tailwind. Another educational site that I run is a sort of poor man's YouTube for medicine. It's a bunch of educational videos, and this is, again, Eleventy, using the Vimeo API to pull in those thumbnails, and data CMS as the back end. So the first big revelation to me came when I realized you could pull in data from APIs for 11T. And this is a pretty cool example of how I do that in the actual frontline healthcare setting. So in my clinic, I run a Raspberry Pi Model 4, and I have 11T running on there alongside Orthanc, which is an open source PACS, that is a picture archiving and communication system. It's a CMS for medical images like MRI and CT scans. The great thing about this piece of software is not only does it have this web interface, but it also has a JSON REST API. So it can, by visiting the /patients URL, I can dump a list of my patients, and then I can iterate down the tree and go through to the patient studies and onto an individual study. I can pipe that study as JSON data through 11T, um, some templating added using my good friend Nunchucks, and then I can output it in different formats. So I create a PDF with PDF.js, a HTML file, and a nice hashed URL. And the net effect of this is I end up with a paperless electronic patient report, convenient, contemporary, and incredibly cost effective based on those cheap technologies we've used. This is something that big medical companies quoted as tens of thousands of pounds to bolt on to our work medical systems, and with a bit of my time, we did it for nothing. So the next slightly unusual use case for 11T that I'm going to come up with is I had the need to run a medical conference this summer with COVID around. And frankly, I don't really like many or any of the conferencing platforms that I've used. I think we're seeing that with Zoom at the moment, aren't we? So I thought, can I improve the experience myself? So strap in. It's going to be a bit fast because I don't have much time left here. Um, First of all, I built a quick landing page to take signups and payments, of course, in 11T. I used a nice little tool called Checkout Page to take payments. It's like a modal popover that interfaces to Stripe. When somebody signed up and paid, the Stripe webhook was handled by Integromat, which is a Zapier alternative, and registered people into Airtable, which was my kind of master user database. When it was time to join the conference, I used like a magic link system because I don't think you really need authentication for a one-off conference. So users entered their email. Integromat again comes in and checks their existence in the Airtable database, and then sends them a joining link using SendGrid API. And the great thing here is I didn't have to do any of that API programming just to make a one-day conference because Integromat kind of does that work for me. So you get your kind of joining link and in you go. And this is what my conference looked like. So as you can see, we had a lot of parallel sessions running. It was really quite big. And all of those were generated in 11T, the whole site was. We had a live updating schedule, and that modal was driven by Alpine. And we even had a little live updates stream, which I used a simple JSON data source from endpoint.io and fetch polling to provide. This is what my project looked like, and it's kind of how I start all of my 11T projects. In fact, I've provided the links there to my two favorite GitHub starters that I've made, one being a kind of bare bones one, and the other being bare bones plus Tailwind thrown in. And if you look at the sessions, these all map to those tiles on my conference page. And this is an example of the most simple one, which is the intro. It has a display as parameter, which tells Nunjux what type of component to render. In this instance, a video popover modal. And then it uses Vimeo as a video source to do things like pulling in the video stream and the thumbnails. So that's my simplest one. But here is a much more complicated data type, which, as you can see, has a full set of medical cases in it, and in fact embeds a whole medical viewer that users could interactively use in the conference. And this one rendered out to this page. So it has a full screen MRI scan that you can look through, case vignettes, and when users have had a good look through it and they want to find the perfect solution, they just click on the show model answer, and it brings in a solution video which they can watch in parallel to scrolling through the MRI scan. So it brings in quite a few technologies, but Eleventy is binding all of this together to make a contemporary conference experience. We even had a live interactive component, a bit like what we're doing now. And for that, I used the Whereby API, again embedded through Eleventy, generating conversational sessions on the fly for attending users. That's a pretty fast voyage through what I've done with Eleventy. Thank you all for listening. And if you'd like to ask me any questions about any of these things, you can find me on Twitter at Dan Fascia.